Anton Rostovich stood at the window of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the city lights flicker in the evening darkness. A half-empty glass of expensive scotch dangled from his fingers. On the coffee table behind him lay the latest glowing review from the New York Times. Rostovich delivers another flawless performance. He hadn't bothered to read past the headline. What was the point? They all said the same thing these days. The grand piano in the corner of his living room gleamed under carefully positioned lights. It was a Steinway Model D, worth more than most people's homes. Anton glanced at it without feeling. Tomorrow he would practice for 8 hours on that bench as he did every day, not because he needed to. Critics had long ago run out of superlatives to describe his playing, but because that's what he had always done. His phone buzzed. Anton ignored it, knowing it would be his manager with another offer. Another sold-out concert hall, another chance to show the world what they already knew. He was the greatest pianist alive. At 47, Anton had achieved everything he'd ever wanted. 3 Grammy Awards, performances at every major concert hall worldwide. A penthouse in New York, an apartment in Paris, a villa in Tuscany. Critics called his Bach definitive, his Chopin revelatory, his Rachmaninoff superhuman. The phone buzzed again, insistent. With a sigh, Anton picked it up. What? He answered, not bothering to check who was calling. Anton! Wonderful news. His manager's voice was breathless with excitement. The Berlin Philharmonic wants you for their centenary celebration. Prime slot. Name your price. Anton took a sip of his drink. Who else are they featuring? Well, Zhang Wei is doing the... Zhang Wei? Anton interrupted. That child who won the Leeds competition? No, tell them I'll only do it if I'm the sole pianist on the program. There was a pause. Anton, that's not reasonable. The celebration features multiple, then I'm not interested. He ended the call and turned his phone off completely. That was the problem these days. Everyone wanted to pair him with these so-called rising stars. Technical skills, certainly. He couldn't deny that. But no depth, no understanding. Just fingers moving quickly over keys, their youth and social media presence doing the rest of the marketing. Anton walked to his piano and sat down, not to play, but simply to rest his hands on the cool ivory. He remembered a time when touching these keys filled him with joy, with wonder. When had that stopped? The silence of his apartment pressed in around him. No family waited for his return from tours. No friends called to check in. Just the occasional cleaning service, the building staff who kept a respectful distance, and the rotating cast of assistants who rarely lasted more than a few months under his exacting standards. Nobody understands what it takes, he muttered to himself, a phrase that had become something of a mantra over the years. What it took was sacrifice. What it took was listening to his father's voice echo in his head during every practice session for 4 decades. Again, sloppy. Again, no feeling. Again. You call that music? Pyotr Rostovich had been a failed pianist himself, talented enough to recognize greatness but never able to achieve it. He had transferred all his frustrated ambitions to his only son, standing over Anton from the moment his small hands could reach the keys of their old upright piano in Moscow. Anton closed his eyes, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest when he thought of his childhood home, the hours of practice while other children played outside, the canceled birthday parties because of recitals, the silence at dinner when he'd made mistakes during practice. You'll thank me one day, his father had always said, and perhaps he should be thankful. Those merciless lessons had forged him into who he was today. After his father died, heart attack when Anton was 23 and already gaining international recognition, Anton had pushed himself even harder. As if to prove to a ghost that he was worthy. The buzz of the intercom broke through his thoughts. Anton frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he pressed the button, the doorman's voice came through. Mr. Rostovich, sorry to disturb you. There's a package for you. The delivery person insists it must be handed to you personally. Anton sighed. Send them up. A few minutes later, a soft knock at his door revealed a small, elderly man in a courier's uniform, holding a thin package wrapped in brown paper. Anton Rostovich? The man asked with an accent Anton couldn't quite place. Eastern European, perhaps, yes. The old man's eyes lit up. It is an honor. I've heard you play in Vienna many years ago. Your Beethoven's Hammerklavier was... He kissed his fingertips. Transcendent. Anton nodded impatiently. The package? Ah, yes. The man handed over the parcel. It comes from Prague. A collector who wishes to remain anonymous. He thought you might find it interesting. Before Anton could ask more questions, the man had disappeared down the hallway with surprising quickness. Back inside, Anton unwrapped the package. Inside was an old vinyl record with no cover, just a plain white sleeve. On the record itself was a handwritten label, Pavel Kovar, Prague Spring Festival 1954. Anton frowned. He'd never heard of Pavel Kovar. How had this unknown pianist warranted a special delivery to his door? Curious despite himself, Anton went to the vintage record player he kept more for decoration than use. He carefully placed the vinyl on the turntable and lowered the needle. The sound quality was poor, as expected from an old recording. But within seconds, Anton found himself sinking onto the couch, his drink forgotten. The piece was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of Anton's signature works. But this interpretation, it was unlike anything he'd ever heard. Technical perfection, yes, but beyond that was something Anton couldn't name. A vulnerability, a humanity, a direct line to emotions he usually kept carefully controlled. Anton felt tears on his cheeks before he realized he was crying. When the piece ended, he immediately played it again, and again. Each time he heard new details, new shadings, new emotional resonances that both thrilled and disturbed him. Who was this Pavel Kovar? Why had he never heard of him? And how was he playing with such freedom, such truth? Anton switched on his phone and immediately searched the name. There was almost nothing. A few mentions in old Prague Spring Festival programs. No recordings commercially available. No biography. He called his manager back. I need information, Anton said without greeting. Pavel Kovar, pianist. Probably active in the 1950s in Czechoslovakia. Find out everything you can. Who? Never heard of. Just do it, Anton snapped, hanging up. He paced his apartment, suddenly restless. Tomorrow he was supposed to begin rehearsals for his upcoming concert series, Chopin's Complete Ballades and Scherzos, a program he'd performed dozens of times. For the first time in years, Anton felt uncertain. The way he played Chopin, precise, controlled, technically immaculate, suddenly seemed hollow compared to what he'd just heard. At 3 a.m., Anton found himself at his piano, playing the G minor ballade from memory. His technique was flawless as always, but now he could hear what was missing. That ineffable quality that Kovar had captured. Anton stopped mid-phrase, hands hovering over the keys. A realization struck him with unexpected force. For all his achievements, for all his acclaim, he might not be the best after all. Not where it truly mattered. The thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. His phone buzzed with a text from his manager. Not much on Kovar. Pianist from small Czech village. Had brief career. Disappeared from public performance around 1956. Rumored to have returned to his hometown. No known recordings except a few archived in Prague. Why? Anton didn't reply. Instead, he opened his laptop and booked a flight to Prague, leaving the next day. His upcoming concerts, his rehearsals, his obligations, none of it mattered now. For the first time in decades, Anton felt a burning curiosity, a need to know, to understand. He had to find out more about this Pavel Kovar. He had to understand what this man knew that he, Anton Rostovich, for all his world-renowned mastery, did not. As dawn broke over New York City, Anton packed a single suitcase. On impulse, he took the vinyl record and wrapped it carefully among his clothes. His doorman looked surprised to see him leaving so early, with luggage. Going somewhere, Mr. Rostovich? Anton nodded, feeling lighter than he had in years. I'm going to find something I've lost, he said. Or perhaps something I never had in the first place. He didn't explain further. How could he? How could he tell anyone that the world's greatest living pianist was suddenly questioning everything he thought he knew about music, about himself, because of a scratchy old recording by a pianist history had forgotten? As the taxi pulled away from his building, Anton looked up at his penthouse windows glinting in the morning sun. For years, that apartment had been his sanctuary, his proof of success. Now it just looked like a beautiful, empty cage. The Prague sky hung low and gray as Anton stepped out of the airport terminal. A light drizzle fell, coating the city in a glistening sheen that matched his unsettled mood. He hadn't slept on the flight, instead replaying the mysterious recording in his mind, trying to understand what made it so special. His phone had been buzzing nonstop. 37 missed calls from his manager. Dozens of texts, emails piling up. The news of his sudden disappearance had already hit the classical music blogs. Rostovich vanishes before major concert series. Anton switched his phone off again. Let them wonder. The taxi driver recognized him immediately. "You are Anton Rostovich. My wife and I saw you play Tchaikovsky 5 years ago. We saved for months for tickets." Anton nodded politely, too tired for conversation. Usually he would have put up his practiced wall of cool professionalism, but today he simply asked, "Do you know a place called the Prague Spring Music Archive?" "Of course. Near the old town, not far from Charles Bridge." "Take me there, please." The driver looked at Anton's suitcase. "Not to your hotel first?" "No, directly there." As they drove through the ancient streets, Anton pressed his forehead against the cool window glass. Prague was a city of music. Mozart had premiered Don Giovanni here. Dvořák and Smetana had called it home. The weight of musical history hung in the air along with the mist. The archive was housed in a narrow building wedged between a coffee shop and a souvenir store. Anton paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk, suddenly uncertain. What exactly did he hope to find? A bell jingled as he pushed open the door. The interior was dim and smelled of old paper and dust. A woman in her 60s looked up from a desk, her eyes widening with recognition. "Mr. Rostovich, what an unexpected honor." Anton approached the desk. "I'm looking for information about a pianist. Pavel Kovar. He performed at the Prague Spring Festival in 1954. The woman's expression changed. "Pavel Kovar? Now that's a name I haven't heard in many years. Why would someone like you be interested in him?" "I heard a recording. His Chopin ballad in G minor." "Ah." She studied Anton's face with new interest. "That recording, one of the few that survived. Come with me." She led him through a maze of shelves to a small listening room in the back. "Wait here. I'll find what we have." Anton sat in the single chair, fighting exhaustion. The room was windowless and quiet. A shelter from the world he'd temporarily abandoned. For the first time in decades, he had done something completely unplanned, completely outside his carefully structured life. The woman returned with a thin folder and a small box. "This is everything we have on Kovar. Not much, I'm afraid." "The recording you heard, was it the one from the '54 festival?" Anton nodded. "There's quite a story behind that performance." She opened the folder, revealing yellowing newspaper clippings and program notes. Kovar was not originally scheduled to play. He was a last-minute replacement when the featured pianist fell ill. Nobody expected much. He was from a small village, trained locally, never studied at any of the great conservatories. She handed Anton a grainy photograph. A thin young man at the piano, head bowed, hands poised above the keys. His posture spoke of complete absorption in the music. "And then he played," the woman continued, "and by all accounts it was extraordinary." The audience gave him a 20-minute standing ovation. Critics called it revelatory. "What happened to him?" Anton asked, unable to take his eyes off the photograph. "That's the strange part. He was offered concerts, recording contracts, international tours, everything a young pianist dreams of. And he turned it all down, disappeared back to his village, never performed publicly again." Anton looked up, genuinely puzzled. "Why?" The woman shrugged. "Nobody knows for certain. There were rumors, of course. Some said he had stage fright. Others thought it was political. Those were complicated times. A few believed he was simply eccentric." She opened the box, revealing several old reel-to-reel tapes. "We have 3 recordings. The Chopin you heard, a Beethoven sonata, and one piece by a Czech composer now forgotten." "Can I listen to them?" "All of them?" She hesitated. "These are archival materials, not generally available to the public." Anton reached for his wallet. "I'll donate to your preservation fund. Whatever amount you think appropriate." An hour later, Anton sat in the small listening room, tears streaming down his face. He had just finished the 3rd recording, a haunting piece by a composer whose name he couldn't even pronounce. Like the Chopin, it was technically brilliant, but with that same indefinable quality that had drawn him to Prague. The archivist returned, looking concerned at his emotional state. "Mr. Rostovich, are you unwell?" Anton wiped his eyes without embarrassment. "Do you know where his village was? Where Kovar went after the festival? I believe it was somewhere near Český Krumlov, a small place called Vilkov. Is it far from Prague?" "About 2 hours south. Mr. Rostovich, if you're thinking of going there, I need to, Anton interrupted. Can you help me arrange transportation? The woman studied him with curious eyes. May I ask why this means so much to you? You're Anton Rostovich. You've played for presidents and royalty. Why chase the ghost of an obscure pianist who gave one remarkable performance 70 years ago? Anton looked down at his hands, the hands that had earned him millions, that critics had described as miraculous, perfect, incomparable. Because, he said slowly, I think he understood something about music that I've been missing, and I need to know what it is. The next morning, Anton found himself in a rented car driving through the Bohemian countryside. The archivist had been surprisingly helpful, even calling ahead to a local historian in Vilkov who might know something about Kovar. The landscape rolled past his window. Gentle hills, forests beginning to show the first hints of autumn color, occasional small towns with red-roofed houses clustered around church spires. It was peaceful, far removed from the high-pressure world of international concert tours. Anton's phone lay on the passenger seat, still turned off. By now, his unexplained absence would have caused a minor scandal in the classical music world. His manager would be frantic. The Berlin Philharmonic would be looking for a replacement. His sudden disappearance would feed the rumors that had always swirled around him, that he was difficult, temperamental, arrogant. All true, Anton acknowledged to himself. But there had been a time long ago when music had been pure joy to him. Before his father's relentless pushing, before the pressure of competitions and critics, before music became about being the best rather than feeling the most, the village of Vilkov appeared suddenly around a bend, a cluster of houses surrounding a small square with a fountain. Anton parked near the square and approached an old man sweeping the steps of what appeared to be the town hall. Excuse me, Anton said in English, hoping the man would understand. I'm looking for someone who might know about Pavel Kovar, the pianist. The old man stopped sweeping and leaned on his broom. Pavel, why do you ask about Pavel? Anton's heart quickened. You knew him? Of course. Everyone here knew Pavel. The old man squinted at Anton. You're not from around here? No, I'm a pianist too. I heard his recording from the Prague Spring Festival. It changed something in me. The old man's face softened. Ah, you have good ears then. Pavel had a special gift. Not just skill, many have skill. He had something more. Is he still alive? The old man shook his head. No, he passed 15 years ago. But his daughter still lives in his house, on the edge of the village by the small lake. The blue house with the willow tree? Anton thanked him and followed his directions, walking slowly through the quiet village. Children played in gardens. An old woman hung laundry on a line. A cat sunned itself on a garden wall. It was a world away from Manhattan penthouses and concert halls. The blue house appeared around a bend, just as described. A large willow tree draped its branches near the water's edge. Through an open window, Anton heard piano music. Not a recording, but someone playing live. A simple piece, perhaps Schumann's Scenes from Childhood, played with delicate touch and obvious love. Anton stood frozen, listening. The playing wasn't technically perfect. There were small hesitations, slight unevenness in some of the passages. But there was that same quality he'd heard in Pavel Kovar's recording. That directness, that emotional truth. He approached the house slowly and knocked on the door. The music stopped. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a simple bun. Yes? She asked in accented English, clearly recognizing he was a foreigner. I'm sorry to disturb you, Anton said. My name is Anton Rostovich. I'm a pianist. I came here because I heard your father's recording from the Prague Spring Festival. The woman's eyes widened. Anton Rostovich, the famous pianist? Anton nodded, suddenly feeling awkward. I wanted to learn more about your father, about how he played the way he did. She studied him for a long moment, then stepped back. Please come in. I think perhaps you have traveled a very long way for something that cannot be explained in words. But I will try. Anton followed her inside, where a simple upright piano stood against one wall. On top of it was a photograph of the same thin young man he had seen in the archive. My father would have been surprised, the woman said with a small smile, to know that Anton Rostovich would one day come looking for his secrets. Not secrets, Anton said quietly. Just truths I think I've forgotten. Kovar's daughter introduced herself as Lenka, and led Anton into a modest living room. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, illuminating a space that felt lived in and warm. Family photos lined the walls, many featuring the thin pianist Anton had seen in the archive photograph. "Tea?" Lenka asked, gesturing toward a worn but comfortable-looking armchair. "Please," Anton replied, feeling strangely out of place in his expensive clothes. He sat down, noticing a shelf of old vinyl records and a small record player in the corner. Lenka disappeared into the kitchen, returning minutes later with a tray bearing a teapot and 2 cups. "So," she said as she poured, "the great Anton Rostovich has come to our little village. My father would have found that amusing." "Did he know my playing?" Anton asked, surprised. "Oh, yes." He had recordings of many pianists. He followed the music world closely, even though he chose not to be part of it. She handed him a cup. "He admired your technique very much." Anton felt a strange mix of pride and disappointment. Technique. Always technique. "But," Lenka continued, watching his face, "he often said you played as if you were afraid to let the audience see inside you." The words stung with their accuracy. Anton stared into his tea. "Why did your father give up performing? After the Prague Spring Festival, he could have had an international career." Lenka smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "That is the question everyone asked. The simple answer is that he didn't want fame, but the truth is more complicated." She stood and walked to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. "My father believed that music wasn't about the performer. It was about connection, to the composer, to the audience, to something bigger than ourselves. After that festival, people started focusing on him, not the music. Critics, agents, record companies, suddenly everyone wanted a piece of Pavel Kovar, and he hated it. But surely he wanted people to hear his playing," Anton argued. "Of course. But not as a celebrity. He came home and taught piano to the children in this village. He played for weddings and funerals and village celebrations. He gave recitals in our small church where everyone could attend for free." She looked at Anton directly. "He played with love always. That was enough for him." Anton set down his cup. "I heard that quality in his playing. That's why I'm here. But I don't understand how to find it." Lenka studied him, her head slightly tilted. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Rostovich?" "Anton, please." "And yes, when was the last time you played simply for the joy of it? Not to impress anyone. Not to be perfect. Just for the pure pleasure of making music?" The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. He genuinely couldn't remember. Lenka nodded, seeing his struggle. "My father used to say that many professional musicians are like beautiful birds who have forgotten how to sing for themselves. They only perform when others are watching." She walked to the record shelf and selected an album. "This is my father playing Schubert in our village church, recorded by a friend on basic equipment. Listen." She placed the record on the player, and soon the room filled with a Schubert impromptu. The sound quality was poor, but the playing— Anton closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. There it was again, that quality he'd been searching for. Not just technical mastery, but something more elemental, more human. When the piece ended, Anton opened his eyes to find Lenka watching him intently. "What do you hear?" she asked softly. "Freedom," Anton whispered. "And truth," Lenka nodded. "My father practiced 4 hours each morning. Scales, exercises, the same technical work all pianists do. But then he would stop and say, 'Now the real work begins.' He would play pieces he loved, not worrying about mistakes or imperfections. He played to express what he felt, not to achieve some ideal of perfection." She walked back to the piano and sat on the bench. "After that festival in Prague, he told me that he felt something changing in himself during the performance. He began playing not for the audience or the critics, but for the music itself. He said it was the most free he had ever felt. And he was afraid that if he continued on the path being offered to him, contracts, recordings, tours, he would lose that freedom again." Anton stood and approached the piano. "May I?" Lenka nodded and moved aside. Anton sat down, surprised by the resistance of the keys compared to his perfectly regulated Steinway. Yet there was something inviting about this well-loved instrument. He began to play the Chopin G minor ballade, the same piece he had heard Kovar play on that first mysterious recording. His fingers moved with their usual precision, but now he was conscious of a wall between himself and the music, a wall built of expectations, of his reputation, Of his father's voice still critiquing every phrase, he stopped abruptly. "What's wrong?" Lenka asked. "I can't," Anton said, frustrated. "I can hear what's missing, but I don't know how to find it." Lenka considered him for a moment, then reached for a photo album on a nearby shelf. She flipped through pages until she found what she was looking for. "This is my father's teacher," she said, showing Anton a photograph of an elderly woman seated at a piano, a young Pavel Kovar standing beside her. Her name was Hanna Novak. She was not famous. She never played in grand concert halls, but she taught my father something precious. She turned the page to reveal a handwritten note. This is what she wrote to him before his performance at the Prague Spring Festival. He carried it in his pocket that night. Anton read the faded handwriting. "Remember, Pavel, the music does not serve you. You serve the music. Let go of yourself and you will find yourself in every note." Something shifted in Anton's chest, a recognition of truth that both attracted and terrified him. "Your father could have had everything I have," he said quietly. "Fame, wealth, acclaim. And would you trade places with him?" Lenka asked. "A village piano teacher who died in obscurity?" Anton looked around the modest room, felt the peace that permeated it, and couldn't answer. Lenka smiled gently. "My father was the happiest person I've ever known. Every day he played with complete joy. People would walk by our house and stop just to listen through the open windows. Children would sit on our steps to hear him practice. When he died, the entire village came to his funeral. The church was so full that people stood outside in the rain." She touched the piano lovingly. "Is that not success in its own way?" Anton stood and walked to the window, looking out at the small lake and the willow tree swaying in the breeze. His phone was still turned off. The world of concerts and critics and competition felt very far away. "Could I stay in the village for a few days?" he asked suddenly. "Is there somewhere I could rent a room?" Lenka looked surprised. "There's a small inn on the square." "But why would you want to stay?" "I need time," Anton said. "Time away from everything. Time to think." Lenka studied him, then nodded. "The inn is called the White Horse. Tell Yosef that you're a friend of mine." Before leaving, Anton turned back. "May I come again tomorrow? To play your piano?" "Of course," Lenka said. "But I should warn you, my father's path might not be your path. What worked for him might not work for you. I understand, but I need to try something different. My way isn't working anymore." As Anton walked back through the village toward the inn, he felt lighter somehow. The pressure that had been his constant companion for decades seemed to have eased slightly. The White Horse was a small, family-run establishment with just 5 rooms. Joseph, the innkeeper, nearly dropped his glasses when Anton introduced himself. "The Anton Rostovich? Staying here?" Joseph glanced around his modest lobby as if suddenly seeing its flaws. "Just for a few days," Anton said. "I'd appreciate privacy, and I'd prefer if you didn't tell anyone I'm here." Of course," Joseph assured him, handing over an old-fashioned key. "Our best room. It has a view of the square." The best room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed and a small desk under a window. No television, no minibar, none of the luxuries Anton was accustomed to. Yet the simplicity felt right somehow. Anton unpacked his small suitcase, then finally turned on his phone. It immediately exploded with notifications, messages, missed calls. His manager, "Where are you?" "Call immediately!" The Berlin Philharmonic. "We need confirmation within 24 hours or we must find a replacement." Music journalists. "Sources say Rostovich has had a breakdown." "Can you comment?" Anton stared at the flood of demands and speculation, feeling strangely detached from it all. After a moment's hesitation, he typed a single message to his manager. "Taking personal leave. Cancel all commitments for the next month. Will explain later." Then he turned off his phone again and placed it in the desk drawer. He walked to the window and looked out at the village square, where an old couple sat hand in hand on a bench and children chased each other around the fountain. For the first time in years, maybe decades, Anton Rostovich had no schedule. No commitments, no expectations, just a borrowed piano, a mysterious legacy, and a question that had drawn him halfway across the world. What did it mean to truly serve the music? The first 3 days in Vilkov passed in a strange, dreamlike state for Anton. Each morning he woke early and walked to Lenka's house, where she would leave him alone with the piano for hours. At first his playing remained stiff, controlled, the same technically perfect but emotionally guarded style that had made him famous. "You're still performing," Lenka told him on the fourth day as she brought him tea. "Even with no audience, you play as if critics are watching." Anton sighed in frustration. "I don't know how to play any other way anymore." Lenka considered this, then asked, "What was the first piece of music you ever loved? Not the first you mastered or the first that won you acclaim, the first that made you feel something." Anton closed his eyes, thinking back to before his father's relentless pushing, before the competitions and pressure. Schumann's Kinderscenen, scenes from childhood. "My mother used to play Träumerei when I was very young." "Play it," Lenka suggested. "Not as Anton Rostovich, the world's greatest pianist. Play it as the child who first loved it." Anton placed his hands on the keys and began the simple, tender melody. At first he played it perfectly, the same interpretation he had recorded to critical acclaim for Deutsche Grammophon years ago. "Stop," Lenka said gently. "You're doing it again. Try closing your eyes. Imagine your mother playing it." "How did it make you feel then?" Anton tried again, eyes closed, reaching back through decades to a memory almost forgotten. Sitting beside his mother on the piano bench, her hands creating sounds that seemed magical to his young ears, a feeling of safety and wonder washing over him. Something shifted. The notes became softer, less precise but more tender. His rigid tempo relaxed, allowing the melody to breathe in a way it hadn't before. When he finished, he opened his eyes to find Lenka smiling. "That," she said simply, "that was music." The village began to notice the famous visitor in their midst. Though Joseph kept his promise not to spread the news, people saw Anton coming and going from Lenka's house. Children peered through the fence, and occasionally Anton would look up from the piano to find faces at the window, listening. Rather than annoying him as it would have in New York, Anton found himself oddly touched by their interest. These weren't critics or wealthy patrons or industry people looking to profit from his talent. They were simply people who loved music. One afternoon, as Anton was leaving Lenka's house, he found 3 children waiting on the garden path. "Are you really the famous pianist?" a small boy asked, eyes wide. Anton nodded, unsure how to interact with children. He rarely encountered them in his normal life. "Will you play something for us?" asked a girl with braided hair. Anton hesitated. "I'm done for today, but perhaps tomorrow, promise?" the third child asked, holding out a pinky finger. Bemused, Anton linked his pinky with the child's small one. "Promise." The next day, when Anton arrived at Lenka's house, he found not just the 3 children but nearly a dozen, along with several parents, waiting in the garden. "I hope you don't mind," Lenka said, amusement in her eyes. "News travels fast here." For a moment, Anton felt a flash of his old irritation. He hadn't come here to perform for villagers. He'd come to work on himself, to find what was missing in his playing. But looking at the eager faces, he felt something soften inside him. "What should I play for them?" "Whatever brings you joy," Lenka replied. Joy. When was the last time he'd associated that word with playing? The small audience settled in Lenka's living room and garden, wherever they could find space. Anton sat at the piano, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been before a performance in decades. These people hadn't paid hundreds of dollars for tickets. They had no expectations of witnessing the great Rostovich. They simply wanted to hear music. He began with Schumann's Träumerei, playing it with the same openness he'd found the day before. Then, following an impulse, he moved into Debussy's Clair de Lune, then a Chopin nocturne. As he played, Anton found himself watching the faces of his listeners. An elderly man closed his eyes, a gentle smile playing on his lips. A mother held her child close, both of them rapt with attention. The children sat unusually still, some on the floor near the piano, following his hands with fascination. He wasn't playing to impress them. He was playing for them, with them. Something inside him unwound a little more with each piece. When he finished, there was no formal applause, just spontaneous expressions of appreciation. The elderly man wiped a tear from his eye. The children crowded around the piano, asking questions about how the pedals worked and why some notes were higher than others. "You play better than my piano teacher," one little girl told him. Matter-of-factly, Anton laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even him. "I should hope so. I've had a bit more practice." That evening, instead of returning to the inn, Anton accepted Lenka's invitation to dinner. As they ate a simple but delicious meal of roast chicken and vegetables from her garden, Anton found himself talking about things he rarely discussed. My father was never satisfied with anything I did, he said, the words coming easier in this kitchen far from his normal world. I would practice until my fingers bled and he would only point out what I'd done wrong. Yet you became a pianist anyway, Lenka observed. I never considered any other path. Music was, he searched for the right words, my way to finally earn his approval. Even after he died, I was still trying to prove something to him. And did you? Earn his approval? Anton stared into his glass of wine. I don't know. Nothing ever felt good enough. And what about your own approval? Lenka asked. Have you earned that? The question hit him like a physical blow. His own approval? He'd never even considered it. There had always been external markers of success. Competition wins, critical acclaim, sold-out concerts, recording contracts, I don't know, he repeated, softer this time. The days began to blur together in a pleasant rhythm. Mornings at the piano, sometimes with Lenka offering gentle guidance, sometimes alone. Afternoons often brought visitors, children for impromptu lessons, villagers who would sit quietly and listen, once even the town's mayor who invited Anton to play at an upcoming harvest festival. His manager had finally stopped calling, instead sending a single text. Whatever breakdown you're having, handle it quickly. Your career won't survive much more of this. Anton read it and felt a curious lack of panic. A month ago, the idea of damaging his career would have been unthinkable. Now he wasn't so sure what he wanted anymore. One morning, after Anton had been in Volkov for nearly 2 weeks, Lenka brought out a piece of sheet music he hadn't seen before. This was composed by my father, she said. He wrote music as well as played it. Anton looked at the handwritten score. The piece was titled simply The Willow by the Lake. Would you like me to play it? He asked. Lenka shook her head. Not yet. I think you're not quite ready for this one. My father said this piece couldn't be played correctly until the pianist had forgotten himself. Forgotten himself? What does that mean? I'm not entirely sure, Lenka admitted, but I think you're getting closer to understanding. That afternoon, instead of practicing, Anton walked to the lake by Lenka's house. The willow tree that had inspired Pavel's composition swayed gently in the breeze, its branches trailing in the water. Anton sat on a weathered bench beneath it, watching light play across the surface of the lake. For the first time in his adult life, he had gone 2 weeks without a rigid practice schedule, without performances or recording sessions or interviews. The constant pressure that had been his companion for decades had receded, leaving space for... what? He wasn't sure yet. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He'd taken to turning it on once a day to check for emergencies. A news alert appeared on the screen. Celebrated pianist Anton Rostovich reportedly in treatment for exhaustion. Career in jeopardy. Anton smiled wryly and turned the phone off again. Let them speculate. The truth was both simpler and more complicated than exhaustion. As dusk fell, he made his way back to Lenka's house. Through the open window, he heard her playing the piano. Pavel's composition, The Willow by the Lake. The music was hypnotic, flowing like water, with unexpected harmonies that somehow perfectly captured the play of light on the lake's surface, the gentle movement of the willow branches, the sense of timeless peace. Anton stood outside listening, not wanting to interrupt. Lenka played without the technical brilliance he possessed. Yet there was that quality again, that direct line to emotion, that sense of truth that had drawn him to Pavel's playing in the first place. When she finished, Anton entered quietly. That was beautiful, he said. Lenka looked up, slightly embarrassed. I don't play well. Not like you or my father. You play with heart, Anton said, surprising himself with his sincerity. That's rarer than technical skill. She smiled, pleased by the compliment. Would you like to try it now? My father's piece. Anton sat beside her on the bench. You said I wasn't ready. Perhaps not. But sometimes we grow ready by trying. She handed him the score and Anton studied it. The notes themselves weren't especially difficult. Nothing compared to the technical challenges he'd mastered throughout his career. But there was something about the composition that intimidated him nonetheless, a vulnerability in the music that would require a vulnerability from the player. Taking a deep breath, Anton began to play. The notes came easily to his fingers, but he could hear that something was missing. He was playing the piece. He wasn't becoming the piece. Stop thinking, Lenka suggested gently. Remember the willow. How it bends but doesn't break. how it touches the water but remains rooted in the earth. Anton tried again, attempting to clear his mind of technique, of himself. For brief moments he found it, that elusive quality of complete surrender to the music. Then his conscious mind would intervene, his trained pianist's brain would analyze, and the magic would slip away. After several attempts he stopped, frustrated but not defeated. "It's like trying to catch smoke," he said. Lenka nodded in understanding. "My father said it took him years to learn how to get out of his own way. You've spent a lifetime building walls around your playing. They won't come down in a few weeks." But they have started to come down, Anton realized. "I can feel it." As he walked back to the inn that night, stars scattered across the clear country sky, Anton felt a strange mix of emotions. Frustration at his inability to fully capture what Pavel Kovar had understood, but also hope that he was on the right path. And beneath it all, a growing certainty that whatever happened next, he could never return to being exactly the pianist he had been before. Whether his career survived this transformation or not, Anton Rostovich was changing. Note by note, day by day in this small village he'd never heard of a month ago, he was slowly finding his way back to the heart of music, and perhaps to himself. 3 weeks stretched into 4, and still Anton remained in Volkov. The news stories about his disappearance had evolved from concern to speculation to outright fiction. One music blog claimed he had joined a monastery. Another reported he was secretly in rehab. His manager had finally sent an ultimatum: "Return to New York by next week or I'm dropping you as a client." None of it seemed to matter much anymore. The harvest festival that the mayor had mentioned was approaching, and somehow Anton had agreed to play. Not a formal recital, but simply providing music throughout the evening as people gathered to celebrate the end of the growing season. "You'll need to play folk songs too, not just classical pieces," Lenka told him as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the lake in gold and crimson. "Do you know any Czech folk music?" Anton shook his head. "You'll have to teach me." So began another chapter in his education. Each afternoon, Lenka would teach him simple folk melodies that had been played in the region for generations. Anton, who could master the most complex Liszt etudes, found himself stumbling over these straightforward tunes. "You're overthinking again," Lenka would say, laughing. "These aren't meant to be analyzed. They're meant to be felt." Gradually, Anton began to hear the heart in these simple melodies, the joy, the sorrow, the celebrations and hardships of ordinary people distilled into music that had survived centuries. The evening of the festival arrived, crisp and clear. Lanterns were strung across the village square, tables laden with food and drink, children running about with excitement. Anton found himself seated at an old upright piano that had been moved outdoors for the occasion. As the villagers gathered, Anton felt a familiar flutter of pre-performance nerves. But it was different now. He wasn't afraid of playing imperfectly. He was afraid of not connecting, of not contributing properly to this community celebration. He began with classical pieces, Chopin, Debussy, Bach, but played them with a looseness, a humanity that would have shocked the audiences at Carnegie Hall. Then, as the evening progressed and wine flowed, he transitioned to the folk songs Lenka had taught him. The reaction was immediate. Older villagers began to sing along. Couples started dancing. Children clapped in rhythm. Anton found himself smiling as he played, adjusting tempo to match the dancers, repeating choruses when the singers were particularly enthusiastic. For the first time in his professional life, he was creating music with people, not just for them. The boundary between performer and audience dissolved. He was part of something larger than himself, and it filled him with unexpected joy. Late in the evening, as the celebration began to quiet, the mayor approached the piano with a glass of wine for Anton. "Thank you," he said simply. "You've brought something special to our little festival." "It's my pleasure," Anton replied, surprised to find he genuinely meant it. Playing here for these people had given him more satisfaction than his last performance at Lincoln Center. As he sipped his wine, Anton noticed Lenka deep in conversation with an elderly man he hadn't seen before. She caught his eye and waved him over. "Anton, this is Mr. Novak," she said. "Hanna Novak's son." Anton nearly spilled his wine. "Your father's teacher? The one who wrote him the note?" The old man nodded, his eyes bright and alert despite his advanced age. "My mother taught many pianists in her long life, But she always said Pavel Kovar understood her most important lesson better than anyone. About serving the music, Anton said. Yes, a simple idea, but so difficult to truly grasp. Mr. Novak studied Anton with curious eyes. Lenka tells me you've been trying to understand my mother's philosophy. Anton nodded. I've had some success, I think. Small moments where I can feel something different in my playing, but I still can't consistently find that quality I heard in Pavel's recordings. Mr. Novak smiled. My mother would say that's because you're still trying to find something, as if it were a technique to be mastered. What Pavel understood was that you must lose something instead. Lose what? Anton asked. Your self-importance, your separation. The idea that you, the pianist, are somehow above or separate from the music or the listeners. The old man gestured to the festival around them. Tonight, when you played our folk songs, did you feel that connection? That sense of being part of something larger than yourself? Anton nodded slowly. Yes, it was. Unlike anything I've experienced before. That's the beginning, Mr. Novak said. Now you must find a way to bring that same quality to all your music, even the complex classical pieces, even when playing for sophisticated audiences in grand concert halls. Is that possible? Anton asked. Pavel thought so, but he chose a different path, to play simply, for people he knew, in places he loved. Mr. Novak put his hand on Anton's shoulder. Your path may be different. Not everyone is meant to step away from the world as Pavel did. The conversation stayed with Anton as he walked back to the inn that night, the sounds of the festival fading behind him. Your path may be different. Those words offered a new possibility, that he could take what he was learning here in Volkov and somehow integrate it into his former life. Not returning unchanged to his old ways, but not abandoning his career entirely either. The next morning, Anton arrived at Lenka's house earlier than usual. She opened the door in her robe, clearly just awake. I'm sorry, Anton said. I couldn't wait. I need to try your father's piece again. Lenka studied his face, then nodded. Come in. Would you like coffee first? No, just the music. She brought out the handwritten score of The Willow by the Lake and placing it on the piano. Anton sat down, took a deep breath, and placed his hands on the keys. This time, he didn't try to analyze the piece or think about technique. He didn't try to impress or achieve perfection. He simply remembered the festival the night before, the people singing together, the dancers moving as one with his playing, the sense of community and connection that had filled him with joy. And then he thought of the willow tree by the lake, its branches both strong and flexible, reaching down to touch the water while remaining firmly rooted in the earth. Anton began to play. The notes flowed from his fingers, but this time they didn't feel like separate sounds he was producing. They felt like a river he was part of, both guiding and being carried by the current. The melody breathed and swayed like the willow branches. The harmonies shifted like light on water. For the first time, Anton understood what it truly meant to serve the music. He wasn't performing the piece. He was allowing it to exist through him. His decades of technical training were still there, providing the foundation. But now something else was present too. An openness, a vulnerability, a willingness to connect rather than impress. When the final notes faded, Anton sat in silence, tears streaming down his face. He hadn't played perfectly. There had been small technical slips his old self would have considered unacceptable. But he had played truthfully, completely present in every note. He looked up to find Lenka watching him, her own eyes wet with tears. That, she said softly, was how my father played it. Later that day, Anton sat by the lake, watching the willow tree move in the breeze. His phone lay in his hand. After weeks of ignoring the outside world, it was time to make a decision. He dialed his manager's number. Anton, where the hell have you been? Do you have any idea? I want to perform again, Anton interrupted. There was a moment of stunned silence then. Well, thank God for that. I'll start damage control immediately. The Berlin Philharmonic has already replaced you, but we can book Carnegie Hall for a comeback recital. We'll spin this whole disappearance as exhaustion, maybe a minor health scare. Not like that, Anton said firmly. Not a big comeback. Something smaller, more intimate. What are you talking about? We need to re-establish your position, show everyone that Anton Rostovich is still the greatest. I'm not the greatest, Anton said, the words feeling strangely liberating. I'm just a pianist. A good one with something to share. But there are many good pianists. Have you lost your mind? This is your brand we're talking about. I want to play at the Prague Spring Festival. Anton continued, ignoring the interruption. The same hall where Pavel Kovar played in 1954. A simple program. And I want half the tickets to be given away free to music students and people who couldn't normally afford to attend. His manager spluttered in disbelief. You can't, what's happened to you? I found what I was missing, Anton said simply. Can you arrange it or not? 2 months later, Anton stood backstage at the Prague Spring Festival, listening to the buzz of the audience filling the hall. As requested, half the seats were occupied by people who had received free tickets. Students, elderly music lovers, families with children old enough to sit through a recital. Lenka was there, along with several people from Volkov who had never been to Prague before, let alone to a classical music festival. They sat in the front row looking both excited and a little out of place among the usual festival audience. Anton's manager paced nervously nearby. The critics from all the major publications are here, he muttered. This program is so conservative. Just Bach, Chopin, and some unknown Czech composer? And what's with the suit? You always perform in tails. Anton straightened his simple dark suit. The music is what matters, not what I'm wearing. And you refused all interviews before the performance. How are we supposed to control the narrative about your disappearance? There is no narrative, Anton said calmly. I needed time away, I took it. Now I'm back, but different. Before his manager could argue further, the stage manager approached. 2 minutes, Mr. Rostovich. Anton nodded, centering himself. He wasn't nervous, not in the way he used to be. There was no fear of technical mistakes or critical reception. There was only the music waiting to be served, and the people waiting to share in it. As he walked onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. The classical music world had been buzzing for weeks about his return. What would the great Rostovich be like after his mysterious absence? Anton bowed, then sat at the piano. He looked out at the audience, the critics with their notebooks, the wealthy patrons in their fine clothes, the students leaning forward eagerly, the villagers from Volkov smiling encouragingly. Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play Bach's Goldberg aria. The notes rose into the perfect acoustics of the hall, simple and profound. Anton played not as the old Rostovich, technically perfect but emotionally guarded, nor as Pavel Kovar, the village pianist who had turned away from the world. He played as himself, Anton Rostovich, a man who had climbed to the heights of his profession, only to discover that the view from the top was empty, who had then descended into the valley to learn what truly mattered, who now stood somewhere in between, bringing together the best of both worlds. When he opened his eyes at the end of the program and saw the faces of the audience, some weeping openly, some sitting in stunned silence, all connected in that moment to something larger than themselves, he knew he had found his path, not the path of acclaim and separation that had nearly hollowed him out completely, not the path of obscurity and retreat that Pavel had chosen, but a third path, one that would allow him to serve the music in the world, to use his gifts not to elevate himself above others, but to create bridges between hearts. As the applause washed over him, Anton looked toward Lenka. She was smiling through her tears, her hands clapping above her head in the Eastern European style. Beside her, he could almost imagine Pavel Kovar and Hanna Novak nodding in approval. The greatest pianist living, perhaps not anymore. But finally, truly a musician in the deepest sense of the word. And for Anton Rostovich, that was enough.